Commander Peterson's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Rivera, I'm going to do something that goes against every protocol in the book. I'm coming in there alone, unarmed, to see this evidence for myself." The announcement sent shock, waves through everyone in the coffee shop. Sarah watched Marcus's face cycle through surprise, suspicion, and finally a grudging respect for the SEAL commander's courage. "Jake, that's not necessary," Marcus replied. "We can transmit the files digitally." "No, we can't. If Blackwater has people embedded in federal agencies, then any digital transmission could be intercepted or blocked. I need to see it with my own eyes, and I need to be able to testify that I verified it personally." Agent Torres came back on the line, her voice tight with concern. "Commander Peterson, I cannot authorize a federal agent to enter an active hostage situation." "Good thing I'm not asking for authorization, Agent Torres. This is a military decision." Sarah felt a surge of admiration for the SEAL commander. He was risking his career and possibly his life to determine the truth, even though it meant going against established procedures and chain of command. "Marcus," she said quietly, "this could be the break you need. If a SEAL Team 6 commander verifies your evidence, it becomes much harder to discredit or suppress." Marcus nodded slowly. "Commander Peterson, you have 5 minutes to get in here before Blackwater arrives. After that, all bets are off." Sarah watched through the windows. As a figure in military fatigues approached the coffee shop, Commander Peterson moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had walked into dangerous situations countless times before. He was older than she had expected, probably in his 40s, with graying hair and the weathered face of a career soldier. When he reached the door, Marcus gestured for his teammates to lower their weapons. The door opened with the same soft chime that had announced Sarah's arrival, but this time it felt like a historic moment rather than a medical emergency. Commander Peterson stepped inside and immediately assessed the situation with the trained eye of a special operations officer. His gaze moved from the hostages to the injured to the evidence displayed on the laptop screen. Sarah could see him cataloging every detail, preparing to make decisions that could affect far more than just the people in this room. "Dr. Martinez?" he asked, looking at Sarah. "Yes, Commander. The hostages are really safe." "They are. Marcus and his team have been professional throughout this entire situation. The only shots fired were the initial ones that wounded the civilians, and those appeared to be accidental discharge during the entry." Commander Peterson nodded and moved to the laptop where Marcus had the evidence displayed. For the next several minutes, the coffee shop was silent except for the soft clicking of keyboard keys. As the commander reviewed document after document, Sarah watched his face change as he processed what he was seeing. The casual expressions of military professionalism gave way to horror, then anger, then a grim determination that she had seen before in doctors dealing with cases of child abuse or other atrocities. "Jesus Christ," he whispered finally. "How long has this been going on?" 3 years that we can document," Marcus replied. "Probably longer." Commander Peterson straightened up and looked directly at Marcus. "Rivera, I owe you an apology. This is exactly the kind of thing we swore to prevent when we took our oath of service." The validation from a respected military commander visibly relieved the tension in Marcus's shoulders. For the first time since Sarah had entered the coffee shop, he looked like someone who believed he might actually survive this ordeal. "What happens now, Jake?" Marcus asked. "Now we figure out how to get this information to people who can act on it without getting everyone in this room killed in the process." Agent Torres interrupted over the phone. "Commander Peterson, I'm showing multiple unmarked vehicles approaching. Your perimeter. Estimate 5 minutes until arrival." Through the windows, Sarah could see the SEAL team members taking more defensive positions. The local police had been moved back, and she could see federal agents coordinating with military personnel to establish a stronger perimeter. "Commander," Sarah said, "I have an idea, but it's going to require trust from everyone." Peterson looked at her intently. "I'm listening, Doctor." "I have contacts at several major news organizations from my work with Doctors Without Borders. If we can get copies of this evidence to multiple news outlets simultaneously, it becomes impossible to suppress. But we need a way to transmit it safely." Marcus shook his head. Any electronic transmission can be intercepted or blocked. What about physical delivery? Sarah asked. Commander Peterson, do your people have the capability to move small data devices to multiple locations quickly? Peterson considered the question carefully. We do, but it would require coordination with agencies that might be compromised. Sarah felt an idea forming. What if we don't use government agencies at all? What if we use civilian emergency responders? She explained her plan rapidly. As a trauma surgeon, she had worked with medical helicopter crews. Sarah stared at Marcus, trying to process the enormity of what he had just revealed. The coffee shop suddenly felt like the center of a storm that reached far beyond the streets of Seattle. War crimes, cover-ups, private military contractors, and now she was somehow the key to preventing what could become a tragic misunderstanding. Show me the evidence, she said. Marcus gestured to one of his teammates who brought over a military-grade laptop. The screen showed files, documents, and video footage that made Sarah's stomach turn. Drone strikes on civilian targets, weapons, shipments to known terrorist groups, falsified after-action reports that covered up atrocities. This is from Blackwater Global, one of the largest private military contractors working overseas, Marcus explained. They've been operating with impunity for years, and when we tried to report what we witnessed, we were threatened, transferred, and eventually discharged on fabricated charges. Sarah scanned through the documents, her medical background helping her understand the casualty reports and injury assessments that had clearly been falsified. How did you get this information? 3 of us were embedded with Blackwater operations in Afghanistan. We saw things that violated everything we swore to protect. When official channels failed, we decided to gather our own evidence. It took 2 years to compile everything, and another 6 months to plan this operation. The phone rang again, interrupting their conversation. Marcus answered it on speaker. Marcus, this is Agent Torres. The SEAL Team Commander wants to speak with you directly. A new voice came through the line, calm and authoritative. Rivera, this is Commander Jake Peterson, SEAL Team 6. I served with your unit commander in Kandahar. I know you're a good soldier. Help me understand what's happening here. Sarah could see the emotion on Marcus's face as he recognized the voice. These weren't just random military units facing off against each other. These were members of the same brotherhood who had served together and were now on opposite sides of a situation that none of them fully understood. Commander Peterson, good to hear your voice. I wish it were under better circumstances. Same here, Rivera. Talk to me. What's this about? Marcus took a deep breath and began explaining the situation to Commander Peterson. As he spoke, Sarah watched the other hostages. Most of them were listening intently, beginning to understand that they weren't just victims of a random crime but witnesses to something much larger. Little Lucy had fallen asleep against Sarah's side, her color much improved after the medical treatment. The woman with the arm wound was alert and stable. The elderly man's heart condition seemed to be under control. Everyone was alive and relatively safe, but Sarah knew that could change quickly if the situation outside escalated. Commander, Marcus continued, we have evidence of systematic war crimes, including the deaths of over 200 civilians, in operations that were never reported. Blackwater has been operating as a shadow military force, answering to no one and accountable to no government oversight. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Rivera, even if what you're saying is true, this isn't the way to handle it. You've got innocent people in there. The innocent people are being treated by Dr. Martinez. She volunteered to stay and help them. But Commander, you need to understand something. Blackwater has assets embedded in federal law enforcement. The moment we surrender this evidence to the wrong people, it disappears forever, and we probably end up dead in some convenient accident. Sarah felt a chill as she realized the full scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just about exposing past crimes. It was about staying alive long enough to ensure the truth came out. Agent Torres came back on the line. Marcus, Dr. Martinez, can you hear me? Yes, Sarah replied. Doctor, we need your assessment of the situation. Are the hostages in immediate danger? Sarah looked around the coffee shop, weighing her words carefully. The injured are stable. Everyone is being treated well, But Agent Torres, I've seen some of the evidence they're talking about. If it's authentic, then this is bigger than a hostage situation. Can you verify the authenticity of the documents? Sarah looked at Marcus, who nodded his permission. Some of it, yes. The medical reports and casualty assessments show clear signs of falsification. Injuries that should have been fatal are listed as minor wounds. Civilian casualties are categorized as enemy combatants. The medical evidence alone suggests systematic cover-ups. There was another long pause. Sarah could imagine the intense discussions happening among the law enforcement and military commanders outside. They were facing a situation that didn't fit any of their standard protocols. Commander Peterson came back on the line. Rivera, I need you to understand something. There are elements outside this perimeter that aren't law enforcement or military. Blackwater has contractors en route to Seattle. If they get here before we resolve this, things are going to get very complicated, very quickly. Marcus's face went pale. How long do we have? Maybe an hour, maybe less. Sarah felt the walls closing in. If Blackwater contractors arrived on scene, the dynamics would change completely. They wouldn't be bound by the same rules of engagement as military or law enforcement. Their primary goal would be to prevent the evidence from becoming public, regardless of the cost in lives. Commander Peterson, Sarah said, what if there was a way to get the evidence to multiple news outlets simultaneously? Make it impossible to suppress. Doctor, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that sometimes doing the right thing requires taking risks that normal protocols don't account for. Marcus looked at her with surprise. Doc, you don't know what you're getting into. These people have killed to keep this quiet. Then, maybe it's time someone stood up to them, Sarah replied. I took an oath to do no harm and preserve life. If this evidence can prevent future atrocities, then helping you get it out saves lives. The coffee shop fell silent, except for the soft breathing of the sleeping child in Sarah's arms. Everyone seemed to understand that they were at a turning point, not just for the immediate situation but potentially for something much larger. Agent Torres broke the silence. Dr. Martinez, are you saying you're willing to help them release this information? Sarah looked around at the faces watching her. The hostages who had initially been terrified now seemed to understand that they were part of something historic. Marcus and his team, who had risked everything to expose the truth. And somewhere outside, military commanders who were trying to figure out how to handle a situation that challenged everything they thought they knew about right and wrong. Agent Torres, Sarah said clearly, I'm saying that sometimes the only way to save lives is to make sure the truth can't be buried. Through the windows she could see increased activity as more vehicles arrived. Time was running out, and the presence of Blackwater contractors would soon make everything infinitely more dangerous. Commander Peterson, Marcus said, we need to make a decision now. Either we find a way to work together, or a lot of good people are going to die protecting the wrong side. The tall gunman stared at Sarah in disbelief. In all his years of military operations and tactical situations, he had never encountered a civilian who voluntarily chose to become a hostage. His training had prepared him for many scenarios, but not for a trauma surgeon who refused to leave injured people behind. You need to go, now, he said, his voice carrying a warning that most people would have heeded immediately. Sarah remained seated next to Lucy, one hand resting protectively on the little girl's uninjured shoulder. These people need continued medical care. Lucy's bleeding has slowed, but she needs proper IV fluids and monitoring. The woman with the arm wound could develop complications. And there might be others who are injured but haven't shown symptoms yet. Through his earpiece, the gunman received rapid-fire instructions from whoever was coordinating the operation. Sarah could see the internal conflict playing out on his face. His orders were clearly to minimize complications and avoid unnecessary risks. But now he had a doctor who was creating an entirely new set of variables. Outside the coffee shop, the situation was escalating rapidly. The local SWAT team had established a perimeter, but they had been joined by federal agents and what appeared to be military personnel in unmarked vehicles. Through the windows, Sarah could see snipers taking positions on rooftops and tactical teams preparing for multiple contingencies. The gunman made his decision. 5 more minutes. Then you leave whether you want to or not. Sarah nodded, knowing that 5 minutes was better than nothing. She used the time to check on each of the hostages, looking for signs of shock, hidden injuries, or medical conditions that might be exacerbated by the stress of the situation. An elderly man near the back wall was showing signs of a heart condition. His breathing labored and his color poor. "This man needs his heart medication," Sarah told the gunman. "It's probably in his jacket pocket. If he goes into cardiac arrest, we'll have a much bigger problem." The gunman gestured to one of his associates, who carefully searched the elderly man's jacket and found a small bottle of nitroglycerin tablets. Sarah administered the medication and monitored the man's vital signs until his breathing improved. As she worked, Sarah began to piece together more information about the situation. The gunman's equipment was high-end military grade. Their communication system was sophisticated, allowing them to coordinate with someone outside the building, and their behavior suggested they were professionals carrying out a specific mission rather than desperate criminals acting impulsively. "You're not just bank robbers, are you?" Sarah asked the tall gunman quietly. He looked at her sharply but didn't answer. "The precision, the equipment, the way you move, this is something bigger." Before he could respond, his earpiece crackled with an urgent transmission. Sarah couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clearly one of alarm. The gunman's body language changed immediately, becoming more tense and alert. "What's happening out there?" Sarah asked. "Your friends have brought some serious firepower. Navy SEALs just arrived on scene." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The presence of elite military units meant that this situation was far more significant than a simple hostage crisis. It also meant that the stakes had just gotten much higher for everyone inside the coffee shop. Through the front windows, she could see figures in dark tactical gear moving with deadly precision. These weren't local police officers or even regular SWAT team members. These were operators trained for the most dangerous missions imaginable, and their arrival meant that someone in authority believed this situation required the ultimate response. The tall gunman received another transmission through his earpiece, this one longer and more detailed. When it finished, he looked directly at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Change of plans, Doc. You're not leaving." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've just become a very valuable asset. Those SEALs out there are good, but they're not going to risk the life of a trauma surgeon who's treating injured hostages." Sarah realized that her decision to stay had fundamentally altered the dynamics of the situation. She was no longer just a good Samaritan trying to help injured people. She had become a strategic element in whatever larger operation was unfolding. "Who are you?" she asked. "What is this really about?" The gunman hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "My name is Marcus. I used to be Army Special Forces. What we're doing here isn't what it looks like." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the coffee shop's phone began to ring. Marcus answered it cautiously. "This is Agent Rachel Torres, FBI negotiator," came a clear female voice through the speaker. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge. In there." "I'm listening," Marcus replied. "We know you have civilians inside, including at least one injured child. We want to work with you to resolve this peacefully. What do you need?" Sarah watched Marcus's face as he considered his response. She could see the conflict in his expression, as if he were weighing options that weren't apparent to anyone else in the room. "The doctor stays with the injured. No one else comes in, no one else goes out. We'll talk, but any attempt to breach this building will result in casualties." "Understood. Can you tell me about the injured? Do they need immediate medical evacuation?" Marcus looked at Sarah, silently asking for her assessment. She shook her head slightly, indicating that the injured were stable for now. "They're being treated. The doctor says they're stable." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Marcus, we know who you are. Master Sergeant Marcus Rivera. Decorated veteran, no criminal record. This doesn't have to end badly." Sarah saw something change in Marcus's expression when the FBI agent used his full name and rank. The fact that they had identified him so quickly suggested they had been watching him, possibly for some time. "Agent Torres, you don't understand what's really happening here," Marcus said. This isn't a hostage situation. It's a whistleblowing operation. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped. Sarah felt the pieces of a much larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. The military precision, the sophisticated equipment, the presence of Navy SEALs. And now, Marcus's claim that this was about exposing something rather than stealing something. "I'm listening," Agent Torres replied carefully. "The data we extracted from the servers in this building's basement contains evidence of war crimes committed by a private military contractor. Civilian casualties that were covered up, illegal, weapon sales and payments to terrorist organizations. We tried to go through proper channels for 2 years. Nothing happened. So we're making sure the evidence sees daylight." Sarah felt her worldview shifting. She had walked into what she thought was a simple hostage crisis, but she was actually in the middle of a complex operation involving military veterans trying to expose corruption and war crimes. Outside, she could see the SEAL teams taking more aggressive positions. They didn't know what she now knew, that the people they were preparing to assault might actually be the good guys trying to expose the bad guys. "Marcus," she said quietly, "if that's true, then those SEALs outside are about to make a terrible mistake." Marcus nodded grimly. "That's why we need you, Doc. You're the only neutral party in this mess, the only one they might listen to." Sarah's heart pounded as she approached the coffee shop, each step taking her closer to what could be her death. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty street, making the scene feel surreal, like something from a movie rather than real life in downtown Seattle. Behind her, she could hear Sergeant Williams speaking rapidly into his radio, coordinating with his superiors and trying to figure out how to handle a civilian who was walking directly into a hostage situation. Sarah didn't look back. She knew that if she hesitated now, she might lose her nerve entirely. As she got closer to the building, she could see more details through the windows. The coffee shop was larger than it appeared from the street, with about 20 small tables scattered throughout the main area. Most of the hostages were clustered near the back wall, sitting on the floor with their hands visible. She counted at least 15 people, including several children. The injured were easier to spot now. A middle-aged man in a business suit was lying motionless near the counter, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. A woman in her 30s was sitting against the wall, clutching her arm and rocking back and forth in obvious pain. And the little girl Sarah had seen from the street was now slumped forward, her bright yellow shirt almost entirely red. 3 gunmen moved through the space with military precision. They wore dark clothing and ski masks, carrying what appeared to be assault rifles. One was positioned near the front door, another by the side windows, and the third was moving between the hostages, occasionally shouting orders that Sarah couldn't hear from outside. Sarah stopped about 20 feet from the front entrance and raised her hands high above her head, making sure the gunmen inside could see her clearly. She needed them to understand that she wasn't a threat, that she was there to help, not to interfere with whatever they were trying to accomplish. The gunman by the front door noticed her immediately. He raised his weapon and pointed it directly at her through the glass. Sarah could see his finger move to the trigger, and for a moment, she thought her plan was about to end before it even began. Then the gunman tilted his head, as if listening to something. He was receiving instructions through an earpiece, Sarah realized. These weren't random criminals acting on impulse. This was an organized operation with someone calling the shots. After a few seconds, the gunman lowered his weapon, slightly, and gestured for Sarah to come closer. She took slow, deliberate steps toward the door, keeping her hands raised and visible. When she was close enough to the glass that they could hear each other, she spoke clearly and calmly. "I'm a doctor. I can see that you have injured people in there. Let me help them." The gunman's response was muffled by his mask, but his message was clear. "Get away from here or we'll shoot you." "Those people are dying," Sarah replied, pointing toward the little girl. "That child has maybe 10 minutes before she goes into shock. The man by the counter has already lost too much blood. I'm not here to cause problems, I just want to save lives." Behind the first gunman, Sarah could see one of the other men approaching. This one was taller and moved with more authority. When he spoke, His voice carried the confidence of someone used to making decisions under pressure. "You're the trauma surgeon from Harbor Medical," he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah was surprised that he knew who she was, but she tried not to show it. "Yes, and you have people in there who need medical attention right now. Why should we trust you? How do we know you're not working with the police?" "Because if I were working with the police, I wouldn't be standing here asking permission to come inside. I'd be part of whatever tactical plan they're developing. Look at me. I'm wearing running clothes and carrying a medical bag. I'm not armed, I'm not wired, and I'm definitely not trained for this kind of situation." The tall gunman considered her words carefully. Through his earpiece, Sarah could hear a faint voice giving him instructions. The conversation lasted nearly a minute, during which Sarah watched the little girl slump further forward. Time was running out. Finally, the gunman stepped back from the door. "You have 10 minutes to work on the injured. Then you leave. Try anything stupid, and we'll kill you and every person in here." The door opened with a soft chime that seemed absurdly normal given the circumstances. Sarah stepped inside, immediately assessing the scene with her trained medical eye. The coffee shop smelled of fresh pastries and blood, a combination that made her stomach turn. She went directly to the little girl first. Up close, the child looked even younger than Sarah had initially thought. Maybe 7 years old, with the kind of innocent face that belonged on a playground, not in the middle of a hostage crisis. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Sarah asked gently as she knelt beside the girl. "Lucy," the child whispered, her voice barely audible. "Hi, Lucy. I'm Dr. Sarah. I'm going to take care of you, okay?" Sarah quickly examined the wound. The bullet had entered through Lucy's shoulder, missing the major arteries but causing significant blood loss. It was serious but treatable if she could stop the bleeding and stabilize the child. As she worked, Sarah was aware of the gunman watching her every move. The tall one who seemed to be in charge stood nearby, his weapon ready but not directly pointed at her. The other two maintained their positions, keeping watch over the other hostages and monitoring the street outside. "I need to apply pressure to stop the bleeding," Sarah explained to the gunman. "Then I need to set up an IV to replace the blood she's lost. She's going into shock." The gunman nodded but said nothing. Sarah got the impression that he understood more about battlefield medicine than most civilians would. His calm demeanor and the way he assessed her work suggested military training. Working quickly, Sarah managed to slow Lucy's bleeding and get her stabilized. The little girl's color improved slightly, and her breathing became less labored. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would buy them time. "The man by the counter," Sarah said, looking toward the motionless figure in the business suit. "He's dead," the tall gunman replied matter-of-factly. "Has been for 20 minutes. Sarah felt a stab of grief for someone she had never met, but she pushed the emotion aside. There were still people she could save. She moved to the woman clutching her arm, who turned out to have a through-and-through bullet wound in her forearm. Painful, but not life-threatening. As Sarah worked on the second victim, she became aware of increased activity outside. Through the windows, she could see more police vehicles arriving, and officers with much more sophisticated equipment were taking positions around the building. The SWAT team had arrived. "Your 10 minutes are up," the tall gunman announced. Sarah looked around the coffee shop at the faces watching her. The hostages looked terrified but grateful. The little girl was conscious and alert for the first time since Sarah had arrived. The woman with the arm wound was no longer in immediate danger. But Sarah realized something else as she prepared to leave. In the few minutes she had been inside, she had learned things about the gunmen that could be crucial to resolving the situation safely. They were organized, disciplined, and well-trained. They had specific goals and weren't interested in unnecessary violence, and most importantly, they were receiving orders from someone else, someone who was making the real decisions. As she stood to gather her medical supplies, Sarah made a choice that would change everything. Instead of walking toward the door, she sat down on the floor next to Lucy and looked directly at the tall gunman. "I'm staying," she said quietly. Outside, She could hear the rumble of heavy vehicles and the sharp commands of tactical officers preparing for what was about to become a much more complicated situation. Sarah Martinez never imagined that her morning jog through downtown Seattle would lead her straight into the middle of a hostage crisis. The 28-year-old trauma surgeon had just finished her night shift at Harbor Medical Center and was trying to clear her head before going home to sleep. The streets were unusually quiet for 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Most people were still in bed, and the early morning joggers hadn't yet emerged. Sarah enjoyed this peaceful time when the city belonged to her alone. She had been running the same route for 3 years, ever since she moved to Seattle to complete her surgical residency. As she rounded the corner onto Pine Street, something felt wrong. The usual sounds of the waking city were replaced by an eerie silence. No traffic, no pedestrians, not even the typical noise from the construction site that had been ongoing for months. Sarah slowed her pace and noticed police barriers blocking both ends of the street. That quote S when she heard the first gunshot. The sound echoed off the buildings, sharp and unmistakable. Sarah's medical training kicked in immediately. Someone was hurt, and people would need help. She had seen enough gunshot wounds in the emergency room to know that every second counted when it came to saving lives. Against every instinct telling her to run away, Sarah moved closer to the source of the commotion. She could see a small crowd of police officers huddled behind their vehicles, speaking urgently into their radios. Beyond them, about 50 yards down the street, was a small coffee shop called Morning Brew. Through the large windows of the cafe, Sarah could make out several figures moving inside. Some appeared to be lying on the floor while others stood with their hands raised. It was clear that this was a hostage situation, and from the positioning of the police officers it was serious. Sarah approached one of the younger officers who was standing slightly apart from the main group. His name tag read Johnson, and he looked nervous, constantly checking his weapon and adjusting his vest. "Officer, I'm Dr. Sarah Martinez from Harbor Medical. Are there injured people in there?" she asked quietly. Johnson looked surprised to see a civilian so close to the scene. "Ma'am, you need to get back behind the perimeter. This is an active situation." "I understand, but if people are hurt, I can help. I'm a trauma surgeon. I've dealt with gunshot wounds before." Before Johnson could respond, his radio crackled to life. The voice was tense and urgent. "We have at least 3 civilians down inside the cafe. Suspects are armed with automatic weapons and have made demands. ETA on SWAT is 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like an eternity when people were bleeding out. Sarah knew from experience that gunshot victims could die within minutes without proper medical attention. The golden hour didn't wait for tactical teams to arrive. "Please," Sarah said to Johnson, "let me talk to whoever's in charge. Those people might not have 20 minutes. Johnson hesitated, then spoke into his radio. Within moments, a sergeant approached them. He was an older man with graying hair and the confident bearing of someone who had seen many crisis situations. "I'm Sergeant Williams." "You're the doctor?" "Yes. Dr. Sarah Martinez, trauma surgeon at Harbor Medical." "How many are injured?" "We count at least 3 people down, possibly more. The suspects fired several rounds when they first took control of the building. We've established communication, but they're demanding a helicopter and safe passage. They say they'll start killing hostages if we don't comply within the hour." Sarah's mind raced. An hour was too long for someone with a serious gunshot wound. "What about the injured? Have the suspects said anything about medical attention?" "They've refused to let anyone in or anyone out. We asked about medical assistance, but they threatened to shoot anyone who comes near the building." The situation was becoming clearer to Sarah. The suspects were using the injured hostages as leverage, knowing that the police wouldn't risk storming the building while wounded people were inside. It was a cruel but effective tactic. "Sergeant, with all due respect, those people are dying while we stand here talking. I need to get inside." "Absolutely not, Doctor. I appreciate your willingness to help, but I can't allow a civilian to enter an active hostage situation. The SWAT team will handle this when they arrive." Sarah understood the sergeant's position, but she also understood what was happening to the people inside that coffee shop. Every minute that passed decreased their chances of survival. She had taken an oath to do no harm, and to preserve life above all else. As they spoke, more law enforcement arrived. She watched as, heavily armed, officers took positions around the building, setting up sniper nests and preparing for what looked like a long standoff. The bureaucracy of crisis response was in full swing, but the people bleeding inside didn't have time for procedures and protocols. Then Sarah noticed something that changed everything. Through the coffee shop's side window, she could see a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting on the floor. The child was pressing her small hands against her shoulder, and even from a distance Sarah could see the dark stain spreading across her bright yellow shirt. That little girl looked exactly like Sarah's niece Emma. The same age, the same blonde hair, the same innocent face that trusted adults to keep her safe. In that moment, all of Sarah's professional training and personal instincts aligned into a single, crystal-clear purpose. She was going into that coffee shop, with or without permission. "Sergeant Williams," Sarah said, her voice steady and determined, "I'm going to save those people. You can either help me do it safely or you can explain to their families why you prevented a doctor from trying to save their lives." The sergeant's expression hardened. "Doctor, if you attempt to interfere with this operation, I'll have you arrested. Then you'll have to arrest me after I've done everything I can for those victims." Sarah began walking toward the coffee shop, her medical bag slung over her shoulder. Behind her, she could hear frantic radio chatter and the sergeant shouting orders. She knew that within minutes, this street would be filled with even more law enforcement, including the elite SWAT teams, who were trained for exactly this type of situation. But that little girl didn't have time to wait for the experts to arrive.